6 hours of warning. That was all the planet got. 6 hours between the moment the Dravani envoy lifted off the lawn and the moment 200 dark warships unfolded above the upper atmosphere like a curtain of black knives. 6 hours was not much time to save a world. But humanity did not need much. They had been getting ready for this without knowing it for a very long time. In a launch tower above the Atlantic Ocean, Captain Idris Holloway pulled his helmet down over his head and locked it into place. He was 43 years old, a former naval pilot who had flown more combat missions than most people had birthdays. His ship was new. The whole class of ships was new. They had been built in secret over the past 8 years, a quiet project nobody had spoken about in public, funded by every major government on Earth at the same time. The carrier was called the Vigilance. It was not pretty. It was not elegant. It was a slab of armor and engines wrapped around a fusion core, and it carried 200 drones and 40 kinetic missiles. Holloway took his seat. The screens around him lit up with the faces of his crew. "Comms, what is the enemy formation?" he asked. "Standard surround pattern, sir. They are spreading into low orbit. Looks like they want to bombard the cities first." "Are they broadcasting?" "Yes, sir. They are demanding our surrender. Same message as the envoy. They give us 1 hour to respond." Holloway smiled behind his helmet. "Tell them we already responded. Launch everything." 18 minutes later, the Dravani fleet learned the truth about humanity. The first missile that struck their flagship was not a beam of energy. It was not a glowing pulse from a fancy weapon. It was a 40-ton steel rod, fired from a rail cannon on a hidden launch platform on the moon, traveling at 20 kilometers per second. The Dravani shields were designed to absorb plasma, to scatter energy, to turn aside fancy beams. They were not designed to stop a steel rod the size of a building. The flagship split in half. Just split. Like an egg dropped on a stone. The Dravani never recovered from that first second. From every continent, from every ocean, from hidden bases on the moon and on Mars, humanity fired. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes raced up through the atmosphere. Drone swarms rose like clouds of black insects. Old satellite weapons that nobody had ever admitted existed turned their faces toward the sky and opened fire. The Dravani had never seen a planet fight back this way. Their war doctrine assumed primitive species would panic, scatter, and beg. They had no plan for a planet that had been preparing for exactly this day. On board one of the surviving Dravani cruisers, Liren held onto a railing as her ship rocked from another impact. The translator officer had been demoted twice during the trip, but reassigned at the last minute to observe the battle and record everything. Now she watched her own people die through the viewing port. She watched a human drone the size of a small bird slip through the cruiser's shields, attach itself to the hull, and detonate with the force of a small star. She watched another Dravani warship lose its engines and drift helplessly into Earth's atmosphere, where it burned away like a falling match. She tapped her tablet and started a new file. She titled it, "Things We Did Not Know About Humans." She made the first note. They do not fight to win. They fight to make sure you can never fight them again. By the 4th hour, 80% of the Dravani fleet was gone. The survivors fled. They jumped back through the gate in a panic, leaving their wounded behind, leaving their dead behind, leaving everything behind. Liren's ship was one of the few that made it out. She did not celebrate the escape. She kept writing. On Earth, Captain Holloway pulled his helmet off and let out a long breath. His crew cheered around him. He did not cheer with them. He had been a soldier long enough to know that a first battle was not a war. The Dravani would come back. They would come back angrier, smarter, and with bigger ships. He turned to his communications officer. "Get me Secretary General Brandt." While the Vigilance returned to orbit and the wreckage of 200 Dravani warships rained down across the upper atmosphere, on a wide green field outside the city of Cape Town, a woman in a sand-colored uniform was walking down a long line of new recruits. Sergeant Miravanko was small. That was the first thing anyone noticed about her. She came up to most of her recruits' shoulders. The second thing they noticed was that she did not seem to care about being small. She stopped in front of a tall young man near the end of the line. He stood at attention, his chin up, his eyes forward. "You are bigger than me," she said. "Yes, Sergeant. You are stronger than me." "Probably, Sergeant. The enemy is bigger than you, faster than you. Their armor is better than yours. Their weapons hit harder than yours. Do you understand?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Then understand this. She tapped his chest plate once with her knuckle. We will not fight them fair. We will fight them in their sleep. We will fight them in their food. We will fight them in their dreams. We will fight them in the dark, in the cold, in the rain, and we will never stop. Because that is what we do. That is what we have always done. Is that clear? 100 voices answered her at once. Yes, Sergeant. She nodded once and kept walking. Above her head, the sky was full of falling stars. The news of the defeat reached the Dravani homeworld through a single survivor. A wounded officer crawled out of a damaged escape pod onto the marble landing pad of the Imperial Palace, bleeding from 3 places, his armor cracked, his eyes wide. He spoke for less than a minute before he collapsed. What he said in that minute changed the Dravani Imperium forever. 200 warships. Gone. To a species the High Admiral had called a sneeze. The Imperial Council met that same night. They did not laugh this time. They did not slap the table. They sat in silence around the black obsidian slab, listening as the recordings from the battle were played back. The sound of the human rail slugs hitting Dravani hulls. The sound of human drone swarms. The sound of Dravani crews screaming on open channels as their ships came apart around them. When the recordings ended, an old voice spoke from the shadows at the back of the chamber. Bring me Tesek. The name made even the senior council members straighten in their seats. Warlord Tesek had not been seen in public for 40 years. He had conquered 9 separate star systems before he had retired. He was older now, thinner, but the legend around him had only grown larger in his absence. When the doors of the chamber opened and the warlord walked in, leaning lightly on a staff made of bone, even High Admiral Varun lowered his head. Tesek did not greet anyone. He walked to the head of the table, set his staff down, and looked at the recordings still flickering on the wall. How many ships do we still have? He asked. 2,000 frontline warships, someone answered. Send them all. Every one. I will lead them myself. There was no debate. There was no vote. The orders went out within the hour. Far away, on a planet that the galaxy still thought of as primitive, something strange was happening. Something the Dravani had not predicted because they had never seen any species do it before. Humanity was uniting. Not in speeches. Not in flag-waving. In factories. In laboratories. In quiet meetings between people who had hated each other for generations and now sat across the same table, sharing what they knew. Old enemies opened their secret files to each other. Companies that had spent decades stealing technology from one another now combined their best engineers and shared workshops. Scientists who had been kept apart by borders now spoke on the same calls every night. In an underground research lab outside Mumbai, a team of 40 engineers from 12 different countries took apart a captured Dravani plasma rifle. They studied it. They argued about it. They drank too much tea and slept too little. After 11 days, they did not just understand the weapon. They had improved it. They had bolted it onto a human rail frame design, swapped out the Dravani power cell for a human fusion battery, and built something the Dravani themselves could never have imagined. Captain Idris Holloway received the first prototype in his hands for weeks after the first battle. He fired it once at a steel target. The target was no longer there. How many can we build? He asked. 10,000 by next month, the engineer told him. 100,000 by the month after. Holloway closed his eyes for a moment. He had spent his whole career in militaries that took years to develop a new weapon. He was watching humanity do it in weeks. Meanwhile, on a Dravani cruiser somewhere in the dark space between stars, Liren was writing again. She had been demoted again after the first battle, partly because she had survived and her superiors had not, partly because someone needed to be blamed. Now she was a low-rank observer on the back end of Warlord Tesek's new fleet. Nobody listened to her reports, but she kept writing them anyway. She wrote a private message to her younger brother on the homeworld. She knew the message would be read by the censors. She did not care anymore. Brother, I have watched these humans now for 2 cycles. They are not like us. They are not like any species we have conquered. They do not fight wars to win. They fight wars to end them. Do you understand the difference? When we win, we take a planet. When they win, they make sure no one can ever attack them again. We have made the worst mistake in our history. I do not think we will survive it. She sent the message. She put away the tablet. She looked out the viewing port at the cold stars and waited for the fleet to jump. The jump happened the next morning. 2,000 Dravani warships dropped out of jump space at the edge of the Sol system. They formed up into a massive sphere, their guns pointed inward at Earth, their shields fully charged, their crews ready for the most important battle of the Imperium's history. What they saw waiting for them was not a planet huddled in fear. It was not a fleet of 200 desperate ships scrambling to defend their homeworld. It was a wall of human warships, 2,000 strong, stretching across the entire approach to the inner system. New ships, bigger ships, ships that had not existed for weeks earlier. Ships with weapons that had not existed for weeks earlier. Ships that were not parked in defensive positions, but arranged in attack formation. The humans were not defending anymore. The humans were hunting. On board his command vessel, Warlord Tesek looked at the display. His face did not move. His old eyes narrowed only slightly. He had been a soldier for 2 centuries. He knew, in that one moment, that he had brought his fleet to the wrong battle. But it was too late to turn back. He raised his hand and gave the order to advance. 2,000 against 2,000. The numbers were even. The fight was not. Warlord Tesek's fleet advanced in the perfect formation that had crushed 9 star systems. Sphere within sphere, heavy ships at the center, lighter ships at the edges. Every cruiser exactly the right distance from every other cruiser. It was a formation that had been refined over 600 years of warfare. It was, in Dravani military thinking, the most perfect way to attack any target. The humans did not use a formation at all. That was the first thing Tesek noticed. The wall of human ships in front of him broke apart the moment his fleet began to move. The ships did not retreat. They did not regroup. They simply scattered, like a flock of birds spooked by a sudden noise, and then reformed into completely different shapes. Wedges, spirals, long thin lines that whipped around the edges of his sphere, triangular packs that punched into gaps that should not have existed. His tactical officers tried to call out the human pattern. There was no pattern. There were dozens of patterns, all changing every few seconds, all based on something the Dravani had never trained for. The humans were not following a doctrine. They were improvising, and they were winning. Captain Idris Halloway led the wedge attack himself. His carrier, the Vigilance, sat at the front point of a triangular formation of 40 ships, all of them carrying the new hybrid weapons. He gave one order to his fleet before they moved. Find the biggest ship. Go through it. The biggest ship was the Iron Crown, Warlord Tesek's personal dreadnought. It was 12 kilometers long. Its hull was layered with reactive plating. Its shield generator was the size of a small mountain. It had never been damaged in battle, not once, in 2 centuries of service. Halloway's wedge hit it like a sword through cloth. The first 10 human ships fired their rail cannons in sequence, each one striking the same point on the dreadnought's shield. The shield held for 3 shots. It cracked for the 4th. It collapsed for the 5th. By the time the 6th shot landed, it was hitting bare metal. The 7th shot was Captain Halloway himself. Not a missile, not a slug. His ship. He had emptied the Vigilance of all non-essential crew an hour earlier and put them on smaller transports. He had kept only 20 volunteers. They flew the Vigilance directly into the broken side of the Iron Crown, through 3 decks of armor, and stopped at the command bridge. The fusion core detonated. 200 meters of the Iron Crown's center vanished. The rest of the ship began to tear itself apart from the inside. Warlord Tesek, sitting on the command bridge, did not have time to issue another order before the floor came apart beneath him. He did not die. He woke up 6 hours later in a human prison cell, his armor cut away, his wounds bandaged, his hands cuffed to a steel chair. A small woman in a sand-colored uniform was sitting across the table from him. Sergeant Miravanko did not look angry. She looked tired. She had been doing this for 3 days straight. "You are Warlord Tesek," she said. It was not a question. "I am. I have questions. You will answer them. If you lie, we will know. If you refuse, we will move on to the next questioning method. Do you understand? You will not break me, human." Vanko smiled, just a little. "We do not need to break you. We just need you to talk. Talking is easier than breaking." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a list. Names of Dravani colonies. Names of subjugated species. Names of military officers. Locations of hidden bases. "We already know most of it," she said. "We just need you to fill in the gaps." Tesek stared at her. He had expected torture. He had expected screams and threats. What he had not expected was a small human woman who looked at him the way a tired teacher looks at a difficult student. He started talking. Captain Halloway did not die in the vigilance. He had ejected at the last moment in a small armored pod, along with his 20 volunteers. The pod was recovered 6 hours after the battle ended. When he was helped back onto the bridge of his new flagship, his fleet greeted him not with cheers, but with silence. They had thought he was dead. They had been ready to mourn. He walked through them slowly, touching shoulders, saying names. He did not give a speech. He sat down at his new command chair and said one thing. Now we go forward. The wider galaxy began to notice. For 3 weeks, news of the second battle spread through the great communication networks of the older civilizations. Species that had never paid attention to the Dravani Imperium began to ask questions. Species that had been afraid of the Dravani began to wonder. And in the great chamber of the Council of 12 Civilizations, a body of ancient species that had ruled the stars for thousands of years, an emergency meeting was called. 3 days later, a small delegation arrived in Earth orbit. They asked, very politely, to speak with the leaders of humanity. Helena Brandt met them in the same chamber where she had received the Dravani envoy. She let them sit. She let them speak. She listened patiently while they explained that humanity was now expected to stop, to stand down, to negotiate, to behave like a proper galactic civilization. When they finished, Helena Brandt folded her hands. "We are not invading," she said. "We are liberating." The delegation did not understand the word at first. The translator had to explain it 3 times. When they finally understood, they looked at each other with something close to fear. Outside the chamber, far away, human ships were already moving toward the first Dravani colony world. Sergeant Miravanko was on the lead transport. She was not going to conquer. She was going to set people free. The first liberated world was called Kessel. It was a small green planet under a yellow sun, home to a quiet farming species that had been subjugated by the Dravani for 600 years. The Kesseli were short, soft-bodied creatures with large dark eyes, and they had not held a weapon since before the Dravani arrived. When Sergeant Miravanko's troops landed in the central valley of the planet, the Kesseli hid in their homes, expecting another conquest, another master, another set of cruel rules. What happened instead confused them so deeply that some of them still tell the story to their children. The humans did not march into the cities. They surrounded the Dravani military bases and gave the occupying troops 1 hour to surrender. When the hour ended, only 3 out of 12 bases were still resisting. Those 3 were dealt with quickly. The other 9 surrendered without a shot fired. Then the humans did something stranger. They left. Or, more accurately, they handed the planet back to the Kesseli. Sergeant Vanko walked into the main Kesseli temple, alone, with no weapon and no armor, and she sat down on the floor in front of the eldest member of the species. She told the elder that the Dravani occupiers had been removed. She told the elder that the planet was theirs again. She asked if the Kesseli wanted human ships to remain in orbit for protection, or if they wanted to be left alone. The elder did not answer for a long time. Then the elder began to weep. The weeping spread through the temple, through the city, through the planet. The Kesseli had not believed, after 600 years, that anyone in the galaxy still remembered the meaning of the word free. News of Kessel traveled faster than any human ship. Within 30 days, uprisings began across the Dravani Imperium. Subjugated species that had been crushed for centuries suddenly found weapons in their hands. Weapons that had been quietly delivered by human agents in the dark of night. Whole Dravani garrisons woke up to find themselves surrounded by farmers and dock workers and craftsmen holding rifles they had been taught to use only days before. Dravani warships found themselves attacked from inside their own ports. The Dravani Imperium, which had ruled the southern arm of the galaxy without serious challenge for over 1,000 years, began to break apart from the inside. In the great chamber of the Council of 12 Civilizations, the meeting was tense. Helena Brandt had come herself. She had come alone, without bodyguards, without an honor squad, without even a translator, because she had spent the past 2 months learning the Council's main language well enough to speak without help. She walked into the chamber wearing a simple dark suit. She set a small black device on the table in front of her. She sat down. The 12 representatives stared at her. Some of them had bodies that did not fit human chairs. Some of them had to be projected through holograms because their physical forms could not survive in a shared atmosphere. All of them were old, in the way that civilizations are old. None of them had ever been spoken to in their own tongue by a species so young. The senior representative, a tall, thin being with 3 sets of eyes, spoke first. Secretary General, the Council demands that humanity stop its current campaign. Helena Brandt did not respond. She tapped the small black device. A recording began to play. It showed a Dravani extermination camp on a conquered world. It showed mass graves. It showed children separated from parents. It showed records, official records, signed by Dravani officers, listing the number of undesirable elements removed each month. The recording played for 11 minutes. The Council did not interrupt. When it ended, Helena Brandt spoke quietly. You knew. All of you. For centuries. You watched it happen and you said nothing because it was easier to ignore. You called the Dravani a civilization. You traded with them. You hosted them at councils like this one. You let them sit in chairs like the one I am sitting in. She paused. We did not start this war. They came to us. They demanded our surrender. They threatened our children. And when we said no, they laughed. So now they are not laughing. And now you are asking us to stop. I will tell you what I told their envoy. We do not lose wars. We end them. And we will end this one. The chamber was silent for a long time. Finally, the senior representative spoke again, in a voice that was much smaller than before. What do you want, Secretary General? Helena Brandt stood up. She picked up her small black device. She tucked it into her pocket. I want the Council to remember what happens when you look away, she said. I want it written into your records, in every language you have, that humanity came to this chamber once, and asked the Council to never again ignore the suffering of a smaller civilization. Do that, and we will speak again. She walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the Council sat in silence. That same week, on a Dravani cruiser drifting at the edge of human space, Liren made the most important decision of her life. She had been collecting evidence for months. Files, recordings, military plans, locations of secret weapons facilities. She had every code, every clearance, every piece of data that the Dravani military relied on. She had a choice. She could deliver it to her own government. She could destroy it. Or she could take it somewhere else. She took it somewhere else. When her shuttle touched down on the surface of the moon, 2 human soldiers met her at the airlock. They did not arrest her. They did not point weapons at her. They simply waited until she stepped out, and then one of them, a young woman with kind eyes, asked her name. My name is Liren, she said. I am here to help you end this war. The Dravani homeworld was called Vahar. It had never been attacked. Not in 11,000 years of recorded history. The orbital defenses were the most advanced in the galaxy. 3 rings of weapon platforms surrounded the planet. A fleet of 500 warships patrolled the outer system. The atmosphere itself was seeded with floating fortresses that could fire downward at any incoming threat. Every Dravani child grew up looking at the sky and believing, with complete certainty, that no enemy would ever reach it. When the human fleet arrived, the defenses did not stop them. They tried. They fought with everything they had. But Liren had brought every code, every weakness, every blind spot in the entire Dravani defense network. The human ships moved through the outer fleet like water moving around stones. The orbital rings were taken in less than a day. The floating fortresses fell in the 2nd day. By the 3rd day, Captain Idris Halloway's flagship was in low orbit above Vahar, and Sergeant Miravanko's troops were dropping in armored pods onto military installations across 6 continents. The humans did not bomb the cities. They did not destroy the farms. They did not touch the temples. They cut the military out of the planet like a surgeon cutting out a tumor, carefully, precisely, and they left everything else alone. It was the strangest invasion the galaxy had ever seen. 3 weeks after the first human boot touched Vahar's soil, Warlord Tesek was brought before what remained of the Dravani High Council. He walked in chains, but he walked with his head up. He stopped in the center of the great obsidian chamber, the same chamber where High Admiral Varun had once signed a war declaration without reading it carefully, and he looked at the council members who had survived. He told them, in his own voice, everything he had learned in his months as a prisoner. He told them that the humans were not interested in ruling the Dravani people. He told them the humans were not interested in revenge. He told them the humans wanted only one thing. They want us to remember. Tesek said. They want every Dravani child born from this day forward to be taught what we did. To the 72 species we destroyed. To the Kesseli. To every world we crushed. They want it written into our laws. They want it carved into our buildings. They want it spoken at every council meeting for the next 1,000 years. And if we do this, they will leave us in peace. The chamber was silent. And if we do not, someone asked. Tesek looked at the questioner for a long moment. Then they will come back. And we will not be a civilization anymore. The Dravani signed the surrender that same evening. Helena Brandt addressed the galaxy 2 days later. The broadcast was carried on every channel of the great communication network, translated into hundreds of languages, watched by trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. She stood at a simple wooden podium. She had no notes. She spoke for less than 10 minutes. They called us the galaxy's deadliest species, she said. They were wrong. We are not deadly because of our weapons. We are not deadly because of our ships. We are deadly because we remember. We remember every wrong done to us. We remember every wrong done to others. And we carry that memory with us into every decision we make. That is what makes a species dangerous. Not strength. Not speed. Memory. She paused. The Dravani Imperium is dissolved. The subjugated species are free. We are going home. We have farms to plant. We have children to raise. We have a planet to take care of. We do not want your stars. We do not want your worlds. We want only one thing in return for what we have done. We want you to look. We want you to remember. We want you to never again pretend you did not see. She stepped away from the podium. The Council of 12 Civilizations voted that same week to invite humanity to join as the 13th member. Helena Brandt accepted, but only after the Council formally inscribed a new clause into its founding documents, in every language. The clause was short. It read, "No member of this Council shall ignore the suffering of any civilization, large or small, for any reason, at any time, forever." Sergeant Miravanko went home to her small house in the hills above Cape Town. She planted a garden. She did not give speeches. She did not write a book. When journalists came to her door, she sent them away politely. Captain Idris Holloway took a long leave of absence. He learned to fish. He learned to cook. He read a great many books he had been meaning to read for 30 years. Warlord Tesek, freed from his chains by his own people, spent the rest of his life traveling through the former Dravani territories, speaking to every survivor he could find, listening to their stories, writing them down. He died at the age of 236, and his last book, called simply Remember, became required reading in every Dravani school. Liren stayed on Earth. She was given the honorary title of First Ambassador, and she lived in a small apartment in the city of Geneva for the rest of her life. She wrote in her journal every night before she slept. On the last page of her final journal, written in her old age, she wrote one short paragraph in careful, simple language. The galaxy learned a new truth in our generation. The deadliest species is not the one with the strongest weapons. It is the one that refuses to look away. It is the one that fights until the work is done. It is the one that, when told to surrender, simply asks, "Do you have any idea what we are?" Now, at last, we know the answer. They are human, and we are lucky to share the stars with them. She closed the journal. She set down the pen. Outside her window, far above the city, the stars were quiet. For the first time in a very long time, the galaxy was at peace. The signature was dry before anyone in the war chamber raised an objection. High Admiral Varun lifted the long parchment off the obsidian table, held it up to the violet sunlight pouring through the dome above, and watched the ink shine. The other 12 council members of the Dravani Imperium clicked their claws in approval. This was the 73rd species the Imperium had declared war on in 900 years. None of the previous 72 existed anymore as free civilizations. There was no reason this one would be different. The hall around them was carved from a single black mountain. Banners of conquered species hung from the rafters, each one a trophy. Varun walked beneath them now, his armored boots ringing against the polished floor. His shadow fell across a flag with 3 suns on it, a flag from a species that had once owned half the southern arm of the galaxy. They had lasted for months. "Read the name again," Varun said. A young translator officer stepped forward from the side of the chamber. Her uniform was simple gray, her rank low. She bowed and held up a thin metal tablet. The species calls itself human, she said. The planet is named Earth. Laughter spread through the council. One member, an old warlord with a cracked horn, slapped the table so hard the parchment jumped. Human, the old warlord repeated. It sounds like a sneeze. More laughter followed. The translator officer did not laugh. Her name was Liren, and she had been the one assigned to study the intercepted broadcasts from this planet. 3 weeks of work. She had listened to thousands of hours of human radio, watched grainy images of human cities, read translated documents from their public networks. What she had found did not match the laughter in this room. She raised her hand. A small motion. Most of the council did not see it. But Varun did. You have something to say, translator? The room went quiet. Liren lowered her hand, and then raised it again, more carefully this time. She knew that low-ranking officers who interrupted high admirals usually did not finish their careers. But she also knew what she had read. High Admiral, the humans have unusual records, she said. Her voice stayed steady, even though her throat felt tight. They have been at war with themselves for almost their entire history. Every generation. Sometimes 2 or 3 wars at the same time. They have weapons we have not seen before. Weapons that do not use energy fields. Weapons that use simple physics, but in ways that... Translator, Varun interrupted. Are you telling me that a planet still launching chemical rockets is a threat to the Dravani Imperium? I am saying we should send a scout fleet first, not an invasion fleet. The cracked horn warlord stood up. The translator wishes to teach us strategy now? Perhaps she should be promoted. The laughter returned, louder this time. Liren felt the heat rise in her face, but she did not look away. She kept her eyes on Varun. The High Admiral studied her for a long moment. Then he set the parchment down. Your report is noted. Your concern is rejected. 200 warships will depart within the hour. The campaign will take 3 days. The humans will surrender on the 2nd. He turned and walked out of the chamber. The council followed. Liren stood alone in the great hall, surrounded by the banners of dead civilizations, holding a tablet that suddenly felt heavier than her armor. She whispered the same word again, more to herself than anyone else. Human. Far across the empty space between stars, in a building made of glass and white stone, an older woman sat at the head of a long wooden table. Her name was Helena Brandt, and she had served as Secretary General of the United Earth Council for almost 6 years. The chamber around her was quiet. Sunlight came through the tall windows in clean stripes. A figure stood at the other end of the table. The figure was tall, covered in dark plates of armor that looked grown rather than built. Its face was not quite a face. 3 eyes, no mouth. Only a vertical slit that hissed when it spoke. The Dravani envoy had arrived an hour ago in a small black craft that had landed without warning on the front lawn. It had walked into the council chamber and placed a single object on the table. A scroll, written in a language no human had ever seen before, with a small translator device attached to it. Helena Brandt had read every word twice. The room was full of generals, scientists, and elected officials from every nation on Earth. None of them had spoken yet. They were waiting for her. She set the scroll down gently. She folded her hands. She looked up at the envoy. You want us to surrender our planet, she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. You want us to give you our cities, our oceans, our skies. You want us to bow to a king we have never met. The envoy tilted its head. Yes. Helena Brandt smiled. It was a small smile, the kind a grandmother might give to a child who had said something foolish. Do you have any idea, she said, what we are? The envoy did not answer. It did not understand the question. It turned, walked out of the chamber, climbed back into its black craft, and rose into the sky. When the doors closed behind it, Helena Brandt stood up. She looked at the generals. She looked at the scientists. She looked at the men and women who had spent their entire lives preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Wake up every weapon we have, she said. Every single one. And outside, above the clouds, 200 warships began to drop out of jump space.